My name is Harold Bennett, and I'm 94 years old. I used to think I was the smartest man in every room because I knew how to save a dollar. Now I sit in a house that's too big for my voice, and I wonder what exactly I was saving my life for. My name is Harold Bennett, and I'm 94 years old. I retired wealthy at 81 after living like a pauper for nearly 40 years. And if I could live it again, I would do it very differently. I wasn't born with money. My father worked at a textile mill, and my mother stretched every meal like it was a miracle. I remember watching the power get shut off when I was a boy, and I remember the look on my father's face more than the darkness itself. It was a quiet shame, the kind that settles into your bones. I promised myself that no child of mine would ever see that look on my face. When I got married at 27, I told my wife, Margaret, that we were going to be careful. Careful turned into strict. Strict turned into relentless. I tracked every penny in a little black notebook. I drove the same secondhand car for 18 years. We never took a real vacation. If the children asked about Disneyland, I would say maybe next year, but next year always seemed like a better year to save. Margaret would sometimes stand in the kitchen holding a catalog, pointing to a modest dining set or curtains she liked. I'd tell her the old ones worked just fine. She stopped asking after a while. I told myself that love meant security, and security meant money in the bank. I worked overtime whenever it was offered. Nights, weekends, holidays. When our son had a school play, I sent a note saying I was proud of him but had to cover a shift. When our daughter graduated from college, I shook her hand in the driveway because I had a meeting with a client. I convinced myself that they would understand someday when they saw the accounts, the investments, the house paid off in cash. By my late 70s, the numbers were impressive. Stocks, property, retirement funds. I read financial statements the way other men read novels. Every quarter that showed growth felt like a victory. I would sit at the kitchen table with a calculator and feel powerful. Margaret would sit across from me with a cup of tea and ask, "And when do we start living?" I always said the same thing, soon. She passed away when I was 79. A quiet heart attack one morning while I was reviewing our portfolio. I remember the ambulance lights reflecting off the windows of the house I was so proud of. I remember standing in the hospital hallway realizing that all the accounts in my name could not buy me one more conversation with her. I retired at 81, just like I planned. I sold some properties at the perfect time. The market had been good to me. My financial advisor shook my hand and called me disciplined, strategic, admirable. I went home to an empty dining room with a table that could seat 10 and set a plate for one. That first year of retirement felt like standing at the finish line of a race where no one else showed up. I had the time now, I had the money, I had the freedom, but my body was slower, my knees stiff, my friends either gone or too tired to travel. My children lived in other states. They called on Sundays, polite and loving, but our conversations felt formal, like we were distant relatives instead of a family that once lived under the same roof. One afternoon, I found an old box in the attic filled with drawings my daughter made and ticket stubs from school events I never attended. Margaret had kept everything. Tucked inside was a small note in her handwriting. It said, "One day hell slow down and we'll have him to ourselves." I sat on the attic floor and cried harder than I did at her funeral. I thought wealth would protect us from pain. What I didn't understand is that it can also protect you from joy if you let it. Every dinner out we skipped, every trip we postponed, every Sunday I chose the office over the park. I told myself I was building something solid, and I built a fortress. The trouble is, a fortress keeps things out, but it also keeps you in. At 85, I tried to make up for it. I offered to fly my children and their families anywhere they wanted to go. I said I would pay for everything. They thanked me, and we did take a trip together. It was pleasant. But I could feel the years between us, like pages torn from a book we never finished reading together. You cannot compress decades of absence into a single vacation, no matter how expensive the hotel is. Now at 94, I spend most mornings on the back porch. The garden Margaret wanted is finally there. I paid a landscaper to design it just the way she once described, with roses along the fence and a small bench under a maple tree. It's beautiful. I sit there and imagine her beside me, telling me it would have been nice to have this when we were young enough to pull weeds together. People sometimes ask me for financial advice. They hear about my portfolio and assume I have some secret formula. I tell them the truth. Discipline matters, saving matters, planning matters. But if your plan requires you to postpone every joy until a distant, uncertain future, you are gambling with more than money. You are gambling with time, and time does not pay interest. The cruel thing about life is that it moves forward whether you participate in it or not. I thought I was being responsible. In many ways, my children never went hungry. The house was always warm. The bills were always paid. But responsibility without presence is a thin version of love. If I could sit across from my younger self at that kitchen table, I would not tell him to stop saving. I would tell him to loosen his grip. Take the trip, leave work early for the school play, buy the dining set your wife likes, and sit at it on a Tuesday for no reason at all. Wealth is not just what sits in an account. It is what fills a memory. I cannot change the 40 years I lived like a pauper by choice. I cannot give Margaret the garden in her 30s or my children the father who cheered the loudest. What I can do is tell you this, quietly and honestly, from a house that echoes more than I ever expected. Do not build a life where you arrive at comfort alone. Save for tomorrow, yes, but do not starve today in the process. One day you will look around at everything you worked so hard to secure, and you will ask yourself who it was all meant for. I know, because I ask that question every evening as the sun sets over a garden my wife never got to enjoy.